In the spring of 2002, a popular girl vanished from her high school prom. 12 years later, her mother would find her dress hidden beneath a trapdoor. The Westbrook sky was painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was May, and the warm evening air carried the promise of the coming summer. The streets of the small Connecticut suburb were buzzing with activity. In front of the Reynolds house, a photographer was capturing the last portraits of Olivia before the big dance. "Smile, honey," Diane Reynolds pleaded, watching her 17-year-old daughter pose on the front lawn. Olivia's turquoise dress shimmered in the golden light of dusk, a perfect match for her bright eyes and a stunning contrast to the dark brown hair that fell in perfect waves over her shoulders. "Mom, we have enough pictures!" Olivia protested, her smile revealing teeth no longer burdened by braces. "Jason will be here any minute." "I know," Diane said, but her camera kept clicking. There was a knot in her stomach, an inexplicable unease that compelled her to capture every single second. Later, she would wonder if it had been a premonition. The doorbell rang promptly at 7. Jason Miller, the high school's star quarterback, stood on the doorstep holding a corsage of orchids that matched Olivia's dress. Tall and athletic, he looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, but his eyes lit up when he saw Olivia. "You look... wow," Jason stammered, earning a few chuckles from the living room. Olivia's father, Richard, a man of few words but with an observant gaze, shook the boy's hand with a perhaps excessive firmness. "Remember, I want her home before midnight." "Yes, sir," Jason replied, swallowing hard. More photographs, more smiles, more warnings from concerned parents. It was a scene playing out in countless American homes on prom night. No one could have imagined that these would be the last images of Olivia Reynolds ever taken at her house. The shared limousine, filled with 5 other friends, pulled away amidst a chorus of laughter and music. Diane and Richard waved from the porch, filled with the unique blend of pride and nostalgia that parents feel watching their children grow up. "Our little girl isn't so little anymore," Richard murmured, wrapping his arm around Diane's shoulders. "She'll always be our little girl," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Inside Westbrook High School, the gymnasium had been transformed into a spring dream, as the banner at the entrance proclaimed. Dim lights, floral decorations, and a glittering mirror ball dominated the atmosphere. Music throbbed as teenagers danced and laughed, living out what many would consider the pinnacle of their high school experience. Olivia Reynolds was the undisputed queen of the ball, even before any official crowning. As head cheerleader, student council president, and an impeccable student, everyone seemed to gravitate toward her. Her crystalline laughter rang out above the music as she danced with Jason under the flashing lights. Mr. Crawford, the school's taciturn janitor, watched from a corner. His eyes followed the students as he listlessly mopped up spilled punch. No one paid any attention to the middle-aged man in gray overalls, a figure so constant in the halls of Westbrook High he had become practically invisible. At 10:42 p.m., Olivia broke away from her group. "I'm going to the bathroom. Be right back," she told her friend Melissa, who simply nodded as she continued dancing with her date. At 10:47 p.m., Jason started looking for her in the crowd. At 11:15 p.m., Olivia's friends formed search parties, fanning out across the school. At 11:30 p.m., someone called the police. Officer Thomas Barnes was the first to arrive. By the time the clock struck midnight, the spring prom had devolved into a nightmare. Olivia's turquoise dress had vanished into the music and the lights, as if swallowed by the night itself. The hours that followed were a dizzying blur for Diane and Richard. The midnight phone call, the frantic drive to the school, the worried faces of teenagers, the police taking statements. The first light of dawn found Diane sitting on the main staircase of Westbrook High, clutching her daughter's small silver handbag, the only thing they had found left behind in the girl's bathroom. "She must have left on her own," one of the officers commented. "There are no signs of a struggle, and several people saw her walking alone toward the east hallway." "Olivia would never leave without telling us," Diane insisted, her voice cracking with unshed tears. "Something has happened to my daughter." Days turned into weeks. Community-led searches, posters with Olivia's smiling face taped to every lamppost and shop window, candlelight vigils, interviews on the local news. It all felt useless against the absolute silence that followed her disappearance. Mr. Crawford was questioned along with all the other school staff. His alibi was solid. He'd been cleaning the gymnasium all night, a fact confirmed by several witnesses and the security cameras in the main hallway. 2 weeks after the prom, Crawford submitted his resignation, citing health problems and the need for a change of scenery. No one questioned his decision. The stone-faced janitor moved to Oregon, according to rumor, and Westbrook lost interest in him as quickly as it did in any other passing news story. But for Diane Reynolds, time had stopped that spring night. While the world kept turning, she remained trapped in a limbo of waiting and hoping, refusing to accept what everyone around her was beginning to imply, that Olivia might never come back. Richard tried to get them to move forward. "Maybe we should consider moving," he suggested a year later, when the house, so full of memories, had become unbearable. Diane flatly refused. "What if she comes back and we're not here? This is her home, Richard. We can't abandon it." As the second anniversary approached, Richard Reynolds packed his bags. The divorce was as quiet as it was painful, another piece of collateral damage from that night. Diane was left alone in the 4-bedroom house, keeping Olivia's room untouched, a shrine to an interrupted life. 12 years, 4,380 days of waiting for a call, a sign, an explanation that never came. Until one afternoon in May of 2014, when fate decided it was time to start unraveling the mystery. The May sun of 2014 streamed through the windows of the Reynolds house, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Diane, now 52, with premature gray hairs streaking her brown hair, moved slowly through the rooms. It was the 12th anniversary of Olivia's disappearance, and like every year, Diane had set out to deep clean the house. It was a strange but necessary ritual, as if by ordering the world outside, she could bring some order to the chaos within. The house, though impeccably maintained, had begun to show its age. Cracks in the walls, water stains on the bathroom ceiling, and a persistent musty smell that no air freshener could completely mask. "This year I'll tackle the basement," Diane promised herself over her morning coffee. It was a promise she made annually and rarely kept. The basement held too many memories. Boxes from Olivia's childhood, Christmas decorations that hadn't been used in years. The skis they bought for that family trip to Vermont, that now felt like it had happened in another lifetime. But something about this day, perhaps the particularly bright light or the especially deep silence of the house, gave Diane the courage she needed. Armed with rubber gloves, cleaning supplies, and several trash bags, she descended the creaking stairs. The air below was dense and cold, as if time had stood still there. Diane flicked on the light, a single bare bulb that cast a weak glow over the space. Boxes labeled in Richard's neat script, "Christmas Camping, Photos 1995-2000, were stacked against the walls. In one corner, a pink bicycle with a basket of fake flowers, Olivia's 14th birthday present, gathered cobwebs. "Have to start somewhere," Diane murmured, approaching a shelving unit covered by a yellowed sheet. Hours passed as Diane sorted, cleaned, and occasionally paused over an object that sparked a particularly vivid memory. a doll with a missing eye, a framed drawing of a house with 4 chimneys. Because it gets really cold in winter, a 5-year-old Olivia had explained, a collection of seashells from their trip to Florida. It was while moving a heavy toolbox that Diane noticed something odd about the floor. One of the concrete tiles seemed slightly misaligned. Intrigued, she knelt to examine it more closely. Sure enough, there was an almost imperceptible gap around a square section, about 3 feet by 3 feet. "What on earth?" she whispered, running her fingers along the edge. When she pressed down on one end, the tile shifted slightly. Her heart began to pound as she used a screwdriver from the toolbox to pry at the edge. With a grating sound of concrete against concrete, the heavy slab lifted, revealing what was unmistakably a trapdoor. Diane froze, her breath catching in her throat. In the 12 years she had lived alone in this house, she had never known of its existence. Richard had never mentioned it. Neither had the real estate agent who sold them the property 20 years ago. With trembling hands, she pulled the trapdoor fully open. A smell of dampness and stale air rose from the dark hole. Diane took out her phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it inside. The beam revealed a small space no bigger than a closet, and there, neatly folded as if it had just been placed, was a dress of an unmistakable turquoise blue. The world seemed to stand still. The sound of blood pulsing in her ears drowned out everything else as Diane recognized the dress her daughter had worn the last time she saw her alive. "No, it can't be," she whispered, though she knew exactly what she was seeing. Moving mechanically as if her body were acting independently of her shocked mind, Diane reached in and lifted the dress out of the compartment. The fabric, though slightly faded by time, was still soft to the touch. The sequins that formed delicate patterns on the bodice glittered faintly in the light. Diane clutched the dress to her chest, a silent scream building in her throat. How did it get here? Who had put it in this hiding place beneath her own house? And why? The questions swirled in her mind as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. The dress still held a faint trace of the perfume Olivia had worn that night, a floral scent Diane had given her for her birthday. Sitting on the cold basement floor, Diane meticulously examined every inch of the garment, searching for a clue, any answer to the questions that had tormented her for over a decade. It was then that she noticed something on the inner lining of the dress. A series of numbers written in blue ink, almost invisible against the fabric. 2C75550442, she read aloud, recognizing the format of a phone number. With trembling fingers, Diane pulled out her cell phone and dialed, not knowing what to expect. After 3 rings, a man's voice, raspy and clearly aged, answered. "Hello?" Diane felt the air leave her lungs. She didn't recognize the voice, but something about it was vaguely familiar. "Who is this?" she finally managed to ask. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When the man spoke again, his voice was cautious. "Depends who's asking." Diane took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. "This is Diane Reynolds. I found my daughter Olivia's dress. Your number was written in it." Another long silence. Diane could hear the man's ragged breathing. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said at last, his voice sounding as if it had aged 10 years in a few seconds. "My name is Edward Crawford. I was the janitor at Westbrook High." The name hit Diane like a physical blow. Crawford. The man who had disappeared from Westbrook shortly after Olivia. The man who, she vaguely recalled, had been questioned and dismissed as a suspect in the early days of the investigation. "What do you know about my daughter?" Diane demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. "Why is your number in this dress, and how did it get into my basement?" I can't talk on the phone, Crawford replied, his voice barely a whisper. It's not safe, but I've been waiting for you, Mrs. Reynolds. 12 years I've been waiting for this call. What are you talking about? Diane insisted, getting to her feet and beginning to pace nervously around the basement, the dress still clutched tightly in her free hand. It means there are things about that night that never came out, things I saw, things I know. Crawford's voice took on an urgent tone. I live in Oak Ridge, Oregon. If you want to know what happened to your daughter, you need to come see me. But you have to come alone, and don't tell anyone where you're going or why. You expect me to just get on a plane and fly thousands of miles because you say so? Diane shot back, disbelief warring with a hope she didn't dare acknowledge. I expect you to do what any mother would do to find out the truth about her missing child, Crawford answered with an unsettling calm. The dress in your basement is just the tip of the iceberg, Mrs. Reynolds. There's so much more you need to know. Before Diane could respond, Crawford added, Write down this address and remember, come alone. There are eyes and ears everywhere, even after all this time. As she mechanically jotted down the address the man dictated, a part of Diane wondered if she was walking into a cruel trap, or if she was finally about to get the answers she had sought for 12 agonizing years. I'll be waiting, were Crawford's last words before he hung up. Diane stood motionless in the center of the basement, the phone in one hand and the turquoise dress in the other, as her mind reeled from what had just happened. In a matter of hours, the annual ritual of spring cleaning had transformed into the possible beginning of the end of her long nightmare. That night, as she packed a small suitcase, Diane's gaze fell upon the photograph of Olivia she kept on her nightstand. Her daughter's radiant smile, forever frozen at 17, seemed to hold a message she had never been able to decipher until now. I'm going to find the truth, sweetheart, Diane promised, her fingers stroking the silver frame. Whatever it is. Bradley Airport was nearly deserted at 5:30 in the morning. Diane moved with grim determination through the corridors, pulling a small carry-on behind her. She had slept for only a few hours, tormented by nightmares in which Olivia called to her from dark, unreachable places. In her jacket pocket was the plane ticket she had impulsively bought the night before. Connecticut to Portland with a layover in Chicago. A journey of nearly 6 hours that would take her to the other side of the country, chasing the faint promise of a man she barely remembered. Are you sure you wish to check in now? Your flight doesn't depart for another 2 hours, the airline employee remarked, glancing with curiosity at the middle-aged woman with pronounced dark circles under her eyes and a feverish gaze. I'm sure, Diane replied curtly, handing over her identification. While she waited in the boarding area, Diane mentally replayed the events of the last 24 hours, trying to convince herself that she wasn't making a terrible mistake. She had called her job to request a week of vacation, something she rarely did. Patricia, her supervisor at the municipal library where she had worked for 8 years, hadn't hidden her surprise. A vacation? You? Is everything all right, Diane? I just need a break, she had lied, knowing no one would believe the truth. She had also called Richard, now remarried and living in New Hampshire. Her ex-husband was the only one who had kept in regular contact over the years, more out of pity than affection, Diane suspected. I'll be away for a few days, she had told him, offering no details. It's because of the anniversary, isn't it? He had asked, his voice weary. Diane, maybe you should consider talking to someone, a professional. She had ignored the advice, as she always did. What could she possibly tell a therapist? That she had found her missing daughter's prom dress in a secret compartment beneath her house? That she was flying to Oregon to meet a former janitor who had mysteriously left town right after the disappearance? The departures board indicated her flight would begin boarding in 15 minutes. Diane glanced at her phone where she had saved Crawford's address. 157 Pine Creek Road, Oak Ridge, Oregon. A small town nestled in the middle of national forests, according to a quick online search. As she boarded the plane, Diane couldn't help but wonder if she was following a real lead or just chasing ghosts, as she had done so many times over the last 12 years. The difference was, this time she had something tangible: the turquoise dress and a phone number that had led to a real voice, to a familiar name. The flight passed in a haze of jumbled thoughts. Diane refused the meal and barely drank any water, lost in memories and speculation. Beside her, a businessman worked on his laptop, occasionally casting worried glances her way, which she never noticed. 6 hours later, exhausted and disoriented, Diane landed at Portland International Airport. The contrast with Connecticut was immediate. The air smelled different, damper and heavy with the scent of pine. Mountains loomed in the distance, imposing and mysterious. Following an improvised plan, Diane rented a compact car and programmed the GPS with Crawford's address. Estimated travel time, 2 hours and 45 minutes, the robotic voice announced. The Oregon landscape scrolled past her window as she drove south on Interstate 5. Vast coniferous forests, small towns that seemed frozen in time, solitary gas stations. It was a world entirely different from her own, and Diane wondered if Crawford had chosen this remote corner of the country for that very reason: to disappear. As she drove deeper into the Willamette National Forest, following signs for Oak Ridge, the sun began its descent. The golden light filtering through the tall trees cast hypnotic patterns on the asphalt. In any other context, it would have been a scenic drive. Now, every mile seemed to bring her closer to an unknown precipice. Oak Ridge was exactly as Diane had imagined. A small logging town repurposed as a destination for hikers and nature lovers. A few main streets, family-owned restaurants, sporting goods stores, and a gas station that appeared to be the community's social hub. Pine Creek Road was on the outskirts, winding through wooded hills where the houses grew farther and farther apart. Number 157 was a modest wooden cabin, partially hidden by pine trees, with an old pickup truck parked out front. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, confirming someone was inside. Diane parked beside the truck and sat in the car for several minutes, gathering her courage. The sun had now set, and the twilight gloom enveloped the clearing. In the distance, an owl hooted its distinctive call. Finally, with her heart hammering against her ribs, Diane got out of the car and walked to the door. Before she could knock, it creaked open. Edward Crawford had aged considerably. The middle-aged man Diane vaguely remembered cleaning the halls of Westbrook High had become a frail-looking old man. His hair, once black with streaks of gray, was now completely white and sparse. Deep wrinkles lined his face, especially around eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his voice as raspy as it had been on the phone, "I was expecting you. Please come in." The cabin's interior was austere but tidy. A main room with a lit fireplace, some basic furniture, shelves filled with books, and most startlingly, walls covered in newspaper clippings, photographs, and maps, all interconnected with colored string. Diane stopped short, recognizing Olivia's smiling face in several of the photos. Headlines like "Search for Missing Student Continues" and "No Leads in Reynolds' Case After 6 Months" covered an entire wall. "What is all this?" Diane asked, her voice barely a whisper. Crawford closed the door, limping slightly as he approached. "My investigation. 12 years of gathering information, connecting the dots, searching for answers." "Your investigation?" Diane repeated, confusion and indignation mixing in her tone. Why would a janitor who left town 2 weeks after my daughter vanished be investigating her case for 12 years? Crawford motioned to a worn armchair by the fire. Please sit down. The story is long and complicated, and it begins long before that prom night. Wary but driven by a need that was stronger than her distrust, Diane sat. Crawford settled across from her, his gnarled hands resting on his knees. First, I must confess something, Mrs. Reynolds. I wasn't just the janitor at Westbrook High. That was my cover. Diane's eyes widened. Cover? What do you mean? Before I was Edward Crawford, the janitor, I was Detective Edward Colton of the Connecticut State Police. I worked in the missing persons unit for 15 years. Diane sat up straight, processing this. You were a police officer, but why pretend to be a janitor? Colton sighed deeply. Because I was investigating a series of disappearances. 3 female students from different high schools in Connecticut had vanished under similar circumstances between 1995 and 2000. All of them 16 or 17 years old, all during school events, all without a trace. The ex-detective rose with difficulty and walked to the wall of clippings, pointing to the photos of 3 teenagers Diane hadn't noticed before, placed next to Olivia's. Jennifer Simmons vanished in 1995 during a field trip. Natalie Porter disappeared in 1997 after a basketball game. Emily Walsh went missing in 2000 during a spring festival. And then in 2002, Olivia Reynolds. Diane felt the air leave her lungs. You're saying my daughter's disappearance was connected to these other girls? Why were we never told? Because officially there was no connection, Colton replied, slowly returning to his seat. Different counties, different police departments, different specific circumstances, but I saw a pattern. I started investigating on my own. Off the books. I went undercover at Westbrook High because I had a gut feeling it would be the next target. If you suspected something, why didn't you stop them from taking Olivia? Diane asked, her voice breaking. Colton's eyes filled with remorse. That is the burden I have carried for 12 years, Mrs. Reynolds. I was watching, but not closely enough. Not in the right place at the right time. He paused. But I saw something that night, something I told no one because I knew they wouldn't believe me. Or worse, they would alert the people who took your daughter. What did you see? Diane asked, leaning forward. I saw Olivia leave the gymnasium. She wasn't alone, she was with someone she trusted. Who? The question came out as a desperate gasp. Crawford looked directly into Diane's eyes. With Vice Principal Robert Harlow. The name fell like a bomb in the small room. Robert Harlow, the charismatic vice principal who had organized search parties, comforted parents and students, and been a pillar of support for the community after Olivia disappeared. No, Diane said, shaking her head. That's impossible. Harlow was the one who personally called every parent to update them on the searches. He came to our house. He supported us. And that made him the last person anyone would ever suspect. Colton replied softly. The perfect cover. Diane shot to her feet, rage momentarily replacing her shock. Why should I believe you? If you really saw something, why wait 12 years to contact me? And how do you explain the dress in my basement? Colton rose as well, moving to a small desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and pulled out a worn folder. Because I needed proof, not just suspicion. And as for the dress, I put it there, Mrs. Reynolds. Diane's world seemed to stop. You? How? Why? Because I found it 3 days after the disappearance, hidden in a secret compartment in Harlow's office. If I had turned it in as evidence, it would have been buried. Harlow had powerful connections. So I hid it in the one place I knew it would eventually be found. Your house. Colton opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and what looked like diary pages. I've spent 12 years gathering evidence, following Harlow's trail, connecting the dots, and now, finally, I have enough to act. Diane sank back into the armchair, overwhelmed. You're saying that Robert Harlow, the man who comforted an entire community, is responsible for my daughter's disappearance? And possibly 3 other girls? I'm not just saying it, Colton replied, holding the folder out to her. I can prove it. And more importantly, I think I can lead us to Olivia. Olivia? Diane's voice was barely audible. You're saying my daughter might be alive, Colton finished. I have reason to believe Olivia Reynolds may still be alive. The pre-dawn light found Diane sitting by the cabin window, staring into the forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. She hadn't slept. Colton's revelations had unleashed a whirlwind in her mind that made rest impossible. Spread across the kitchen table next to a now cold cup of coffee was the contents of the folder the ex-detective had given her. Photographs, reports, newspaper clippings, phone transcripts, bank statements. A macabre mosaic that, piece by piece, built a portrait of the man who had allegedly taken her daughter. Robert Harlow wasn't always his name, Colton had explained as Diane examined the documents with trembling hands. His real name is Richard Hansen. He changed his identity in 1994 after accusations of inappropriate behavior began to surface at a high school in Bridgeport where he worked as a gym teacher. The documents showed a disturbing pattern. Hansen Harlow moved every few years, always working within the education system, always in positions that gave him authority and access to students, and always leaving behind a trail of rumors and suspicions that never quite solidified into formal charges. How is it possible that no one connected these dots? Diane had asked, disbelief and rage growing in equal measure. How could this man keep working with children? The system is designed to fail, Colton had answered bitterly. Vague references, sealed records, non-disclosure agreements. Schools desperate for administrative staff rarely dig deep enough into ambiguous backgrounds. But the most disturbing items were the telephoto photographs. Harlow, 7 years after Olivia's disappearance, visiting a remote property in the mountains of Montana. There, Colton had captured blurry but recognizable images of several young women working in a large garden. Women who, according to his research, could be some of the missing girls. I can't be 100% certain that one of them is Olivia, Colton had admitted. The photos are from 2009 and the distance makes a positive ID difficult, but the facial structure, the height, there is a real possibility. Now as the dawn painted the forest in shades of gold, Diane tried to absorb the possibility that her daughter was alive, and held for 12 years by a man an entire community had trusted. The door to the adjoining room opened and Crawford emerged, fully dressed, as if he too had spent a sleepless night. He got straight to the point. Have you made a decision? The night before, after laying out all the evidence, Crawford had presented her with a plan Diane had listened to with a feeling that was equal parts desperate hope and weary skepticism. Yes, she replied, her gaze finally breaking from the forest outside. We're doing it. We're going to find my daughter. Crawford gave a solemn nod. We'll need help. I can't do this alone. Not at my age. Not with my health. You mentioned someone last night. Who is this Lucas Mitchell? A former colleague from the state police, Crawford explained, walking to the table and picking up his phone. He retired 5 years ago, but he still has connections. More importantly, he's one of the few people I'd trust with my life. While Crawford made the call, Diane studied the photographs from Montana again. Was it possible that one of those blurred figures was really Olivia? And what if this turned out to be just another false lead like so many others she had chased over the years? Mitchell will be here this afternoon, Crawford announced, ending the call. "In the meantime, there's something we need to do." He moved to a closet and retrieved a black case Diane hadn't noticed before. Opening it, he revealed professional photographic equipment, a camera with a telephoto lens, a tripod, and various accessories. "What's that for?" Diane asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Harlow moved to Sisters, Oregon 5 years ago," Crawford explained. "A small tourist town about 2 hours from here. He bought an isolated cabin in the national forest. He travels there one weekend a month, always alone, with enough supplies for several people." Diane's heart began to pound. "You think he could have Olivia there?" Crawford shook his head. "No. The Montana property is his main location. The cabin in Sisters is more of a way station, a transit point. I've been monitoring it for 3 years. According to his pattern, Harlow is due to arrive today. We need to document his movements, confirm he's sticking to his routine. And then when Mitchell arrives with the resources we need, we go to Montana." The next hour passed in silent preparation. Crawford packed surveillance gear, maps, and a small suitcase. Diane called the hotel in Portland where she'd booked a room and canceled the reservation. Her original plan to return to Connecticut after speaking with Crawford was now a distant memory. Instead, she was embarking on a journey into the unknown, chasing a hope as fragile as it was persistent. The drive to Sisters was wrapped in a silence thick with anticipation. As Crawford navigated winding roads through increasingly dense forests, Diane stared at the landscape without truly seeing it, her mind consumed by scenarios of both hope and terror. "What happens if we actually find Olivia?" she finally asked, giving voice to just one of the dozens of questions tormenting her. Crawford kept his eyes on the road. "First, we confirm. Then we notify the federal authorities. I have a contact at the FBI who's aware of my suspicions, though not all the details. If I can confirm the location and the presence of people being held against their will, they'll move in. And if Olivia isn't there, or if she is, but she's not the same." The question hung in the air between them. They both knew what she was really asking. What would be left of the teenager who had vanished 12 years ago? What traumas, what invisible wounds would she have suffered? Would she even be recognizable as the daughter Diane had lost? "One step at a time," Crawford answered at last. "First, we find her. The rest comes after." Sisters turned out to be a picturesque tourist town, with Old West-style facades set against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains. Crawford bypassed the town center, taking back roads that wound deep into the surrounding woods. Finally, he pulled the vehicle into a small clearing, hidden among the pines. "We'll go on foot from here. Harlow's cabin is about a 20-minute hike just over that hill. There's a vantage point I've used before." The trail was barely visible, likely carved out by wildlife. Following Crawford through the undergrowth, Diane was surprised by the ex-detective's agility despite his age and limp. "How many times have you done this?" she asked quietly as they climbed the pine needle-covered slope. "Dozens," he replied without turning. "Every month at first, then only when I noticed a change in his routine. The last time was 3 months ago." At the crest of the hill, Crawford stopped abruptly, crouching behind a cluster of bushes. Diane mirrored his movement, and together they looked down into the small valley below. In its center, partially hidden by trees, stood a log cabin considerably larger and more modern than Crawford's. A black SUV was parked in front of it. "He's early," Crawford muttered, quickly pulling the camera from its case. "This is unusual." Through the telephoto lens, he meticulously photographed the vehicle, the cabin, and finally, the man who emerged from it. Even at this distance, Diane instantly recognized Robert Harlow. The former vice principal of Westbrook High had aged, but he still carried himself with the same erect posture and air of authority. His hair, now completely white, was still perfectly styled. He wore expensive outdoor clothing and moved with the confidence of a man completely at ease in his domain. Seeing him after all these years, knowing what she now knew, stirred a wave of nausea and rage so potent she could barely contain it. "Easy," Crawford whispered, noticing her tense. "We can't afford to be seen, not now." For the next hour, they documented Harlow's every move. He unloaded several boxes from his vehicle, checked the perimeter of the property, and finally went back inside. "He's waiting for someone," Crawford commented, his eye never leaving the viewfinder. "This isn't his usual routine." As if to confirm his suspicion, half an hour later, a second vehicle appeared on the access road, a white van with the logo of a delivery company. The driver, a young man in a uniform, got out carrying a large package. Harlow came out to meet him, signed a document, and quickly carried the parcel inside. "Interesting," Crawford murmured, taking more photos. "In 3 years, he's never had a delivery here." They continued their surveillance until the sun began to set. Harlow came out several more times, always engaged in seemingly normal activities. Chopping wood, checking an external generator, inspecting the property line. "Time to head back," Crawford finally announced. "Mitchell will be waiting for us." As they made their way back down the slope, Diane couldn't shake the image of Harlow. The man who had possibly taken her daughter, who might have held her captive for 12 years, was living a life of mundane normalcy. He bought supplies, received packages, chopped wood. How could anyone reconcile that image with the horrors Crawford suspected? Back at Crawford's cabin, a man in his 60s was waiting for them. Lucas Mitchell, with his sturdy build and severe expression, radiated the authority of a man accustomed to giving orders. "Diane Reynolds," she introduced herself, extending a hand that Mitchell shook firmly. "I've heard a lot about you, Mrs. Reynolds," he responded, his voice surprisingly gentle for his appearance. "Eddie's kept me in the loop on your case for years." The three of them sat around the kitchen table as Crawford connected the camera to a laptop and displayed the afternoon's photographs. "Unusual behavior," Mitchell commented, examining the images. "The delivery especially. Did you get the company name?" "Montana Express," Crawford replied. "A local company operating mainly in the Bozeman area." "Where his other property is," Diane said, connecting the dots. Mitchell nodded. "Exactly. It looks like he's coordinating something between the two locations." He turned to Crawford. "Do you have those satellite images I sent you?" Crawford pulled a large envelope from a drawer and spread several aerial photographs across the table. They showed an expansive rural property with a main house, several outbuildings, and what looked like an orchard and cultivated fields. "Sunrise Ranch," Mitchell explained. "Officially, it's a meditation and healing retreat, invitation only. It was purchased by a non-profit foundation in 2004, 2 years after Olivia disappeared." "And Harlow is connected to this foundation?" Diane asked. "Not directly," Mitchell answered. "It's registered under the name Margaret Langley, a 78-year-old woman who conveniently passed away 6 years ago, but the lawyer who handles the foundation's affairs has visited Harlow in Portland at least 4 times in the last 2 years." Crawford pointed to one of the aerial photos. "The ranch is in an extremely remote location. The nearest town is 40 kilometers away, the closest neighbors 15. It's the perfect place to keep people cut off from the outside world." "What's the plan?" Diane asked, trying to keep her voice steady as the possibility that her daughter might be in that place became terrifyingly real. Mitchell unfolded a topographical map of the region. "Early tomorrow we fly to Bozeman. I have a contact there who will provide vehicles and gear. Then we'll conduct a reconnaissance of the ranch perimeter. If we confirm the presence of women being held against their will, we contact my liaison at the FBI in Helena. And if they won't intervene? Diane pressed. It's been 12 years. The evidence is circumstantial. The two ex-cops exchanged a look heavy with meaning. In that case, Mitchell finally said, we have a plan B, but let's hope we don't have to use it. That night, as Diane tried to rest on the small living room sofa, she heard Crawford and Mitchell talking in low voices in the kitchen. Fragments of their conversation drifted to her. Too risky. If it's really a cult, they could be armed. Fear and hope twisted together inside her, forming a knot that made sleep impossible. What would they find in Montana? Would Olivia really be there? And if she was, what kind of life had she been living for the past 12 years? Before dawn, the three of them were on their way to the Portland airport. The small private plane Mitchell had arranged was waiting for them on a secondary runway. A friend owed me a few favors, was all the explanation he offered. During the flight, Crawford showed Diane more details from his investigation: financial records for the foundation, purchasing patterns for supplies consistent with feeding a large group of people, and an abnormally high electricity consumption for a property supposedly used for occasional meditation. Why would he do something like this? Diane asked, trying to comprehend the mind of the man who might have taken her daughter. What does he gain by holding these girls for years? Crawford and Mitchell shared another uncomfortable glance. Based on similar patterns, Crawford answered finally, we believe Harlow has established some kind of isolated community, possibly with religious or pseudo-religious overtones. With him as the central figure, of course. A cult? Diane translated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. It's a possibility, Mitchell admitted. We've seen cases where perpetrators convince their victims that the outside world is dangerous, that they're only safe with him. He left the sentence unfinished, but the message was clear. Even if they found Olivia alive, she might not be the same person who had disappeared 12 years ago. She might even resist being rescued. Bozeman, Montana greeted them with a clear sky and a crisp chill in the air. Mitchell's contact, a former ranger named Carter, was waiting with 2 all-terrain vehicles equipped for rough country. The ranch is about 3 hours from here, he explained as they loaded their gear. The last stretch of road is practically impassable in the rainy season. Lucky for us, it's been dry these past few weeks. As they drove down increasingly remote roads, Diane felt they were approaching not just a physical place, but the end of a long and painful chapter of her life. For better or for worse, she would soon know the truth about what had happened to her daughter. We're close, Carter announced after nearly 3 hours, turning onto a barely visible dirt track. We'll continue on foot from here. The vehicles could be spotted. Hoisting backpacks with surveillance equipment, water, and provisions, the small group ventured into the dense woods. Crawford, despite his age and physical condition, moved with the determination of a man who sees the finish line after a long race. Finally, after an hour's hike, they reached a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. And there, in the center of cultivated fields and surrounded by smaller buildings, stood Sunrise Ranch. Through a pair of high-powered binoculars, Diane surveyed the property. Women of various ages were working in the fields and gardens. A few men, less numerous, supervised the activities or performed maintenance tasks. At a glance, it could have been an agricultural commune or a legitimate spiritual retreat. There, Crawford said suddenly, passing the binoculars to Diane and adjusting the direction. In the backyard of the main house, Diane focused where he indicated. A young woman with brown hair pulled back in a braid was watering plants in a small garden. Her profile, the way she tilted her head slightly, the gesture of brushing a stray hair from her forehead. Diane's world seemed to stop, despite the 12 years that had passed, despite the teenager having become a woman. She would know those gestures anywhere. "Olivia!" she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "It's her! It's my daughter!" Time seemed to stand still as Diane watched the woman in the garden. 12 years of searching, of worn-out hope, of dreams and nightmares all culminated in this single moment. Her hands were shaking so badly that Crawford had to steady the binoculars for her. "Are you sure?" Mitchell asked softly, his professional skepticism warring with the hope he saw in Diane's eyes. "It's her," Diane affirmed, not a trace of doubt in her voice. The way she tilts her head when she's concentrating, that gesture with her hand. She's done that since she was a little girl. Crawford and Mitchell exchanged a meaningful look. They had a positive identification. The next step was critical. "We need to document everything," Crawford said, deploying a camera with a telephoto lens. "The more evidence we have, the easier it will be to convince the FBI to intervene." For the next 3 hours, the group meticulously recorded the activities on the ranch. Mitchell, with his background in surveillance operations, sketched a detailed map of the property, noting access points, potential barriers, and the location of every visible person. Through the camera's lens, Diane studied her daughter's new face. Olivia had grown, of course. The 17-year-old girl was now a 29-year-old woman. Her face had lost its youthful roundness, giving way to sharper, more defined angles. Her body, which Diane could barely glimpse beneath the long, simple dress she wore, looked strong and healthy. Physically, at least, she showed no obvious signs of mistreatment. "What's she doing now?" Carter asked, having been watching another section of the ranch. "Teaching," Diane replied, watching as Olivia patiently showed a girl of about 8 how to plant seeds. She was always good with children. Crawford captured the scene with his camera. "There are at least 7 minors visible on the property. 3 look like teenagers, the rest are younger." "Children of the women being held?" Mitchell suggested, his expression darkening. No one answered. The implication hung heavy in the air. If some of these women had been abducted as teenagers and kept here for over a decade, the children could very well be a result of that captivity. In the mid-afternoon, a new element entered the scene. A white van bearing the same Montana Express logo they had seen in Oregon pulled up to the ranch. A man stepped out whom Diane recognized immediately. Robert Harlow. "He's earlier than we expected," Crawford muttered, rapidly taking several photographs. "Must have caught an early flight from Sisters." They watched as Harlow was greeted by several men with clear displays of respect. The women working in the fields paused their activities, bowing their heads as he passed. "Definitely an authority figure," Mitchell commented, "possibly the leader of some kind of cult, just as we suspected." Diane couldn't tear her eyes from Olivia, who had left the garden and was now approaching the group surrounding Harlow. Even at this distance, she could perceive a shift in her daughter's posture. More upright, more cautious. "Do you think she's here voluntarily?" Diane asked, verbalizing the doubt that had been eating at her since they arrived. "It's been 12 years. If she really wanted to escape, mind control leaves no visible marks," Crawford answered softly, "especially when it begins in adolescence. Isolation, manipulation, forced dependency," Mitchell added. "They're powerful techniques, possibly more effective than chains. You build a prison in the victim's mind, one where she convinces herself she wants to stay." A knot formed in Diane's throat. The idea that her bright, strong Olivia had been broken to that extent was almost unbearable. "We have enough," Crawford finally declared as the sun began to set. "It's time to contact the FBI." The descent from the hill was considerably faster than the climb. The certainty of having located Olivia gave wings to their steps, especially Diane's. For the first time in 12 years, she had a concrete purpose, an achievable goal. At the makeshift camp they had established several miles from the ranch, Mitchell used a satellite phone to contact his liaison at the FBI. "Special Agent Monica Reeves," a voice announced on the other end of the line. "Mitchell, what have you got for me?" For 20 minutes, Mitchell meticulously described what they had observed, emphasizing the positive identification of Olivia Reynolds, missing for 12 years, and the possible connections to other disappearance cases. The response was disheartening. "I understand your concern, Lucas," Agent Reeves said, "but what you're describing could simply be interpreted as an alternative community. Adults living voluntarily on private property. We have no concrete proof of coercion or unlawful imprisonment." "A girl who disappeared 12 years ago isn't enough proof?" Diane interjected, unable to contain herself. "Mrs. Reynolds, your frustration is understandable," Reeves replied in a professional tone. "But legally, an adult has the right to live wherever they choose, even if it means disappearing from their former life. If your daughter is now 29 and shows no obvious signs of being held by force—" "She was kidnapped as a minor," Diane exclaimed. "Which would have to be proven in court," Reeves countered. "Without physical evidence of the initial abduction, without direct testimony, and with so much time having passed, any defense attorney would argue she left voluntarily and chose to stay." Mitchell took the phone back. "Monica, you know my record. You know I wouldn't call you if I wasn't convinced. There are at least 7 minors on that property, in what is clearly a situation of controlled isolation." A long silence followed his words. "Send me the photographs," Reeves said finally. "All of them, and any other evidence you have. I'll present it to my superiors, but I can't promise anything. And it definitely won't be immediate." After the call ended, a heavy silence fell over the group. "How long?" Diane asked at last. "Best case? Days," Mitchell answered. "Possibly weeks." Diane shook her head. "I'm not waiting weeks. My daughter is right there, less than 3 miles away. I'm not leaving without her." "Mrs. Reynolds," Carter began in a conciliatory tone, "I understand your frustration, but we need to be realistic. That ranch looks well protected. There are men who could be armed. An improvised intervention could endanger everyone, including your daughter." "Besides," Mitchell added, "if she's truly been under some form of mind control for years, we can't just assume she'll come with us willingly." Diane stood up, pacing nervously around the small camp. "There has to be something we can do. Some way to, I don't know, communicate with her. Let her know I'm here." Crawford, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Perhaps there is." They all turned to him. "Tomorrow is Sunday," he continued. "I noticed several people from the ranch leaving this morning with baskets, presumably heading to town for supplies. If they maintain the same pattern, it's possible Olivia or one of the other women will go out tomorrow." "Are you suggesting an interception?" Mitchell asked, skeptical. "I'm suggesting an opportunity for controlled contact," Crawford corrected. "No confrontation, no drama. Just a chance for Diane to approach her daughter in a neutral environment." The idea took shape quickly. Carter knew the region well and confirmed that the only town within a 25-mile radius was Pinecrest, a small settlement with little more than a general store, a gas station, and a cafe. "If they're going anywhere for supplies, it has to be there," he affirmed. The plan was simple but risky. Diane would wait in the town cafe, the only place someone might stop for a while. If Olivia appeared, she would attempt a casual approach without immediately revealing her identity so as not to startle her. "We have to be extremely cautious," Mitchell warned. If Harlow or any of his men accompany the women, we'll have to abort. And if Olivia shows any sign of distress or fear upon recognizing you, Crawford added, turning to Diane, you'll have to back away. We can't risk a public incident that would alert Harlow. Diane nodded, though inside she knew she would be incapable of backing down once she saw her daughter up close. That night, while the others rested, Diane stayed awake by the dying fire, gazing at the photograph of Olivia she always carried in her wallet. The smiling teenager from the spring dance now seemed to belong to another life, another reality. "I'll find you tomorrow," she whispered to the image, "and I'll bring you home." The dawn arrived with a fine mist clinging to the valleys and ravines, giving the landscape an ethereal quality. The group broke camp efficiently, loading everything into their vehicles. "Remember," Crawford said as they drove towards Pinecrest, "patience and subtlety. You might only get one chance." The town turned out to be even smaller than they had anticipated. A single main street with weather-beaten wooden buildings, some businesses permanently closed, and a population that likely didn't exceed 200. The Pine and Brew Cafe occupied the main corner, its windows offering a clear view of the street and the general store across from it. It was the perfect spot for the discreet surveillance they needed. Diane went in alone, selecting a table by the window. Crawford and Mitchell split up strategically, one in the general store, the other casually strolling down the street. Carter remained in one of the vehicles, ready for any eventuality. The hours passed with painful slowness. Diane ordered coffee after coffee, distractedly flipping through a local magazine while her heart pounded with anticipation. The few customers who came and went glanced at her with curiosity. Clearly an outsider, an unusual sight in Pinecrest. Shortly after noon, Mitchell entered the cafe hurriedly and sat across from Diane. "Ranch van," he murmured, "just parked in front of the store." Diane tensed, resisting the urge to whip her head around to the window. "3 women," Mitchell continued. "One of them matches Olivia's description. No men in sight." Diane's heart leaped. "Are you sure?" Mitchell nodded. "Crawford confirms visual ID from the store. They're buying supplies. They'll likely come in here next." The next 15 minutes were torture. Diane tried to maintain a calm appearance while her mind raced in 1,000 directions. What would she say? How would Olivia react? Would she even recognize her? Finally, the cafe door opened. Diane held her breath as 3 women in simple, long dresses entered, speaking quietly among themselves. And there she was. Olivia, her daughter, less than 30 feet away after 12 years of absence. Seeing her in person without the distance and binoculars was an even greater shock. The resemblance to the teenager who had vanished was undeniable, but the years had transformed the girl into a woman. Her brown hair, now streaked with a few premature strands of silver, was pulled back in a simple braid. Her face bore lines of expression that shouldn't be on someone her age, but it was her eyes that had changed the most, still the same shade of blue-green but now veiled by a permanent wariness. Mitchell rose discreetly. "I'll keep watch outside," he murmured, leaving Diane alone at the table. The 3 women approached the counter, ordering drinks to go. They spoke little, keeping their eyes down most of the time. They didn't seem afraid, Diane noted, but contained, as if they had learned to take up as little space as possible. While they waited for their order, one of Olivia's companions went to the restroom. The other moved to examine the community bulletin board by the door. Olivia was momentarily alone. It was now or never. Diane rose slowly and walked to the counter, positioning herself next to her daughter. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Could you pass me one of those sugar packets?" Olivia turned automatically, reaching for the packets and offering them with a polite but distant smile. "Here you are." Her voice, Olivia's voice. More mature but unmistakably hers. It took a superhuman effort for Diane not to embrace her right then and there. "Thank you," she replied, taking the packets, then trying to maintain a casual tone. "Are you from around here? I'm just passing through and looking for recommendations on what to see in the area." A shadow of suspicion crossed Olivia's face. "We don't get out much," she answered curtly. Then, as if remembering some instruction on politeness, she added, "But the lakes to the north are nice this time of year." "I see," Diane continued, desperate to keep the conversation going. "So you live nearby?" Olivia seemed to tense slightly. "In a private community, Sunrise Ranch." "Sounds lovely," Diane remarked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Have you lived there long?" A flicker of something, confusion, doubt, briefly crossed Olivia's eyes. "Many years," she answered vaguely, then changing the subject. "Are you on vacation?" "I'm actually looking for someone," Diane replied, unable to hold back any longer. She discreetly pulled the photograph from her wallet, the same one she had shown to hundreds of people over years of searching. "My daughter. She disappeared a long time ago." Olivia's eyes fell on the photograph, and for an instant Diane thought she saw a spark of recognition. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by an expression of polite sympathy. "I'm so sorry," Olivia said with apparent sincerity. "I hope you find her." The barista called her name, announcing that her order was ready. Olivia turned to collect the drinks, but Diane, in a final, desperate act, gently touched her arm. "Olivia," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's Mom." The world seemed to stop. Olivia froze completely, her back to Diane. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. When Olivia finally turned around, her face had lost all its color. Her eyes, wide and searching, scanned Diane's face with a mixture of emotions impossible to decipher. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, her voice firm but with a slight tremor. "My name is Sarah Langley, and I don't know you." Diane's heart plummeted. "Olivia, honey, it's me. I've been looking for you for 12 years. A flash of panic crossed Sarah's face. She glanced quickly toward her companions, who were fortunately still distracted. "Please," she whispered with urgency, "you have to leave. You can't be here. It's dangerous." "I came to take you home," Diane insisted, tears threatening to spill. "I don't have another home," Olivia replied, but something in her voice had changed. It no longer sounded certain. "The Master protects us. The outside world is corrupt and violent." "The Master? You mean Robert Harlow?" Diane pressed, trying to break through the mental programming. "The man who kidnapped you from the spring dance?" Olivia's eyes filled with confusion. "You don't understand. He saved me. We were all lost and he found us." But the words sounded mechanical, as if recited from a script. "Olivia, that turquoise dress you wore that night," Diane began, her voice soft. Something seemed to fracture in Olivia's expression. A memory, perhaps, piercing the fog of years of manipulation. "The dress," she murmured. "How would I know about it?" Diane pressed gently. "I found it, in our house, with a phone number written on the lining." Olivia's companions were beginning to look in her direction, their expressions laced with concern. Time was running out. "I can't talk now," Olivia said hastily, gathering the drinks. "It's too dangerous for both of us." "Please," Diane pleaded, "let me help you. We can get you out of there. Today." For a fleeting moment, it seemed Olivia was considering it. Then the mask of serenity fell back into place. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice louder now, clearly for the benefit of anyone who might be listening. "But as I told you, I'm not the person you're looking for. Have a good day." She turned and walked away quickly, rejoining the other women. As they left the cafe, Diane saw Olivia cast one last look over her shoulder, a look heavy with a storm of conflicting emotions. Mitchell entered the moment the women were gone. "What happened?" he asked, seeing the devastation on Diane's face. "She recognized me," Diane answered, the tears now flowing freely. "On some level, she recognized me, but she's trapped, Mitchell, not just physically, her mind. It's like she's been brainwashed." "Did she say anything useful?" "She calls herself Sarah Langley now," Diane replied, the details suddenly surfacing. "Langley, like the woman the foundation is registered to." Mitchell's eyes widened. "Margaret Langley? This confirms a direct link." Outside, Crawford hurried toward them. "They're leaving. They looked agitated, especially Olivia. What happened?" As Diane briefly recounted the encounter, the three of them watched the women climb into a van and speed away. "This complicates things," Crawford muttered. "If Olivia tells Harlow about this meeting—" "She won't," Diane interrupted with surprising certainty. "I saw something in her eyes at the end. Doubt, recognition. I don't think she'll say anything, at least not right away." "We can't risk it," Mitchell decided. "If there's even a chance Harlow finds out, he could move all of them. Or worse." They returned to their vehicles, heading back to their makeshift camp to regroup and contact the FBI. The brief interaction with Olivia had changed everything. It was no longer a theory or a suspicion. They now had direct confirmation that the young woman was under some form of mind control, possibly along with many other victims. As they drove down the winding forest road, Diane stared out the window, lost in thought. After 12 years of searching, she had found her daughter. She had stood face to face with her, heard her voice, but instead of the joy of reunion, she felt a new kind of anguish. Olivia was alive, but trapped in a mental prison, one perhaps more impenetrable than any physical cage. And the clock was ticking. The ride back to camp was thick with tense slints, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Diane replayed every second of her brief encounter with Olivia, analyzing every nuance of her expression, every inflection in her voice, searching for a sign of the daughter she had lost 12 years ago. "Sarah Langley," she murmured, finally breaking the silence. "She calls herself Sarah Langley." Crawford, his eyes fixed on the forest road, nodded slowly. "That surname is no coincidence. Margaret Langley, the elderly woman whose name is on the foundation that controls the ranch, died 6 years ago." "Harlow must have adopted the name for his disciples," Mitchell added from the back seat. "As if they were a family. It's a common tactic in isolated groups. It creates a sense of belonging, a shared identity." Diane closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill again. "She recognized me. For a moment I saw my Olivia in those eyes. But then it was as if something pulled her back. 12 years of conditioning don't vanish in an instant," Crawford said gently. "The fact that there was a flicker of recognition at all is extraordinary." When they reached the camp, they found Carter already on a call with Agent Reeves of the FBI. His grim expression was not a good sign. "Jurisdiction is complicated," Carter was explaining as the others gathered around. "Technically, we'd need direct evidence of an ongoing federal crime to justify an immediate raid. The original kidnapping happened 12 years ago in another state, which complicates things even further." "And Diane's testimony about her encounter with Olivia isn't enough?" Crawford asked, his frustration clear. "Legally," Reeves's voice came through the speakerphone, "what she's describing could be interpreted as an adult woman who has chosen to change her identity and live in an isolated community. Without evidence of physical coercion or forced restraint." "Forced restraint?" Diane interrupted, unable to contain herself. "What about mind control, brainwashing? My daughter doesn't even recognize her own name." She refers to Harlow as the master, for God's sake. A brief silence followed her outburst. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Reynolds, Reeves replied at last. But psychological manipulation is notoriously difficult to prove in court, especially with adults. We need something more concrete. What about the minors? Mitchell interjected. There are at least 7 children on that property. We are exploring that angle, Reeves conceded. County Child Protective Services has been notified, but again, without direct evidence of abuse or neglect. How long? Diane asked, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside her. How long before you can do something? We are fast-tracking everything we can, Reeves replied. But realistically, we're talking days, possibly weeks, to get the necessary warrants, especially with a case this sensitive. After the call ended, the group sat around the folding table. The sun was beginning to set, painting the forest in shades of gold and casting long shadows between the trees. We can't wait for weeks, Diane stated flatly. If Olivia mentions our meeting to Harlow, they could disappear again. Move everyone to another location. I agree, Crawford said. And now that we've made initial contact, there's a psychological window of opportunity. The cracks in her conditioning could seal back up if we don't act soon. What exactly are you proposing? Carter asked, looking uneasy. Because if you're suggesting some kind of unofficial intervention, I'm suggesting we need more evidence, Crawford cut in. Evidence that will force the FBI to act immediately. Mitchell, who had been quiet and thoughtful, finally spoke. There's a possibility. It's risky, but it could work. All eyes turned to him. Olivia now knows her mother is here, looking for her. That's planted a seed of doubt. If we could just communicate with her again, in private, maybe we could convince her to give us the testimony or proof we need. How? Diane asked. We can't just walk onto the ranch. No, Mitchell agreed. But from our surveillance, the women go out regularly for specific tasks. Olivia works in the outer gardens near the northern edge of the property. If we could find a moment when she's alone. It's too risky, Carter objected. If we're caught, we could make the whole situation worse. Do you have a better idea? Crawford shot back. Every hour that passes increases the chance that Harlow finds out what happened today. Diane, who had been listening intently, spoke up. I think it could work, but it should be me. I should be the one to make contact, alone. The 3 men began to protest at once, but she held up a hand to silence them. Think about it logically. If she's already having doubts, seeing me again could push her further. And as a mother looking for her daughter, I'm less of a threat than any of you. A thoughtful silence fell over the group. Finally, Crawford nodded slowly. Psychologically, it makes sense. But you're not going alone. We'll escort you to a safe vantage point and be ready to move in if there's any trouble. The plan took shape quickly. Based on their observations, Olivia usually worked in the outer gardens in the early morning. The northern border of the property was adjacent to a wooded area that would provide enough cover to approach undetected. Bring this, Mitchell suggested, pulling a small digital recorder from his gear. If you can get Olivia talking about her situation, about Harlow, about how she got there, that would be the evidence we need. And this, Crawford added, handing Diane a small envelope. Photographs of Olivia before she disappeared, from her life in Westbrook. They might help trigger her memories. As the men finalized the technical preparations, Diane stepped away, seeking a moment of solitude. The surrounding forest hummed with the sounds of dusk, the whisper of wind through the leaves, the occasional call of a bird. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Fear, hope, determination, rage, all of it was there. But above it all was a maternal instinct so primal and powerful. She knew she would do anything. risk everything to get her daughter back. Dawn arrived with a low-hanging fruit that crept between the trees, creating an ethereal, silent landscape. Diane, who had barely slept, was ready long before the agreed-upon time, dressed in dark clothing to blend in with the vegetation. She tucked the photos and the recorder into her jacket pockets. "Let's go over the plan one more time," Mitchell said as they prepared to leave. "We'll take you to the observation point on the North Ridge. From there, once you confirm Olivia is alone, you'll approach using the path we identified yesterday. You have 20 minutes max. If you're not back by then, or if we see any sign of trouble, we're coming in." Diane nodded, absorbing every detail. "And if I convince her to come with me?" The three men exchanged uncertain glances. "That would be ideal," Crawford said, "but also the most dangerous. If anyone from the ranch sees you leaving together." "We'll improvise," Mitchell concluded. "The priority is to make contact and, if possible, get a recorded testimony." The hike to the observation point was tense and silent. The morning fog provided extra cover but also hampered visibility. They moved slowly, each step calculated to minimize noise. When they reached the designated spot, a small rise offering a clear view of the ranch gardens, they crouched in the undergrowth. Through binoculars, they could see early activity on the property. And there, just as they had anticipated, was Olivia. She was alone, methodically tending to an herb patch near the property line, dressed in the same simple attire as the day before. "This is it," Crawford whispered, handing the binoculars to Diane. "Remember, 20 minutes. Diane nodded, her heart pounding so hard she feared it could be heard from a distance. She began to make her way cautiously down the slope, using the trees for cover. The garden where Olivia worked was separated from the woods by a clear 10-meter stretch of land. Diane stopped at the tree line, watching her daughter. Seeing her absorbed in such a mundane task created an illusion of normalcy that was a cruel contrast to the reality of her situation. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Diane moved silently to the edge of the clearing. From there, she called out in a low but clear voice, "Sarah? Sarah Langley?" Olivia straightened up abruptly, spinning toward the sound. Her eyes widened in recognition, and for a second it looked as if she might run. Then, after a quick glance back toward the main buildings, she walked to the edge of the garden. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered urgently. "It's dangerous." "I had to see you again," Diane replied, stepping cautiously forward until she was just a few meters away. "Please, just listen to me for a few minutes." Olivia hesitated, her eyes darting nervously between Diane and the distant buildings. "5 minutes," she conceded. "Then you have to go." "Can I come closer?" Diane asked. After a moment of doubt, Olivia gave a short, sharp nod. Diane crossed the space between them until only a meter separated them. The proximity allowed her to see details she had missed before, a small scar above her left eyebrow that hadn't been there, hands calloused from manual labor, and a deep, weary exhaustion in her eyes that went beyond the physical. "I brought something for you," Diane said softly, taking out the envelope of photographs. "Just look at them, please." With slightly trembling hands, Olivia took the envelope and pulled out the pictures. The first showed a 16-year-old Olivia in the backyard of their Connecticut home, smiling widely in her cheerleader uniform. The next, Olivia with her father on a fishing trip when she was 12. Another from her 15th birthday party, surrounded by friends. As she flipped through them, something in her expression shifted. The mask of controlled calm began to crack, revealing a raw confusion and a pain that seemed to well up from deep within her. "These are tricks," she murmured, but without conviction. "Manipulated photos to confuse me." "They're memories, Olivia," Diane answered gently. "Memories of your life before the spring formal of 2002. Before Robert Harlow took you." At the mention of the dance, Olivia flinched. Her hands tightened, slightly wrinkling the edge of one of the photographs. The master saved me, she recited mechanically, but her eyes remained fixed on the images of her past life. I was lost in a corrupt world. He showed me the way. The way to what, Olivia? Diane asked, her voice soft but firm. To a life of isolation? Of service to a man who stole your youth, your education, your future? Something in Olivia's expression seemed to crack. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. You can't just show up after all these years and expect everything to go back to the way it was. I'm not that person anymore. I'm not Olivia. Diane took a small step forward, closing the distance between them. Then who are you? Do you really feel like Sarah Langley, or is that just a name they gave you to make you forget who you really were? Olivia looked down, the photograph still clutched in her hands. It's complicated. Talk to me, please, Diane pleaded. Help me understand. Discreetly, Diane activated the recorder in her pocket. Every word would now be captured, potential evidence for the authorities. Olivia remained silent for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was so low that Diane had to lean in to hear. At first I tried to escape, she confessed. The first few months, maybe the first year. But the ranch is so isolated and there was always someone watching. And then, over time, the daily sessions with the master began to change something inside me. Sessions? Diane asked, a wave of nausea rising within her. Re-education, Olivia explained, her voice strangely detached. Hours of listening to his teachings, of repeating mantras, of learning how corrupt and dangerous the outside world is. She paused, her eyes growing distant. The girls who resisted, they received special treatment. Isolation, fasting, sometimes worse. How many are there? Diane asked, trying to keep Olivia talking. How many women are there against their will? No one is against their will, Olivia replied automatically. Then after a beat, at least they don't feel that way anymore. There are 23 of us. Some came like me. Others were born on the ranch. The children? Diane asked, dreading the answer. They are our future, Olivia recited. The next generation purified from the corruptions of the outside world. Her voice took on a mechanical tone, as if repeating words rehearsed countless times. What about you? Diane pressed gently. Do you have children? A shadow crossed Olivia's face. I was not chosen for that honor. Something in her tone put Diane on high alert. What does that mean exactly? Only the most devout are selected to continue the lineage, Olivia explained, that detached tone returning. I was considered problematic for too long, too attached to my memories of the outside world. A chill ran down Diane's spine at the implication. Olivia, Sarah, what they've done to you, to all of you, it's criminal. It's abuse. It's manipulation. It's salvation, Olivia countered, but with less conviction than before. Her eyes returned to the photographs. That's what they tell us. And do you really believe that? Diane asked, risking a touch, taking her daughter's hand. To her surprise, Olivia didn't pull away. Sometimes, she admitted in a whisper. Other times, there are dreams, memories that slip through, of a different life. Her eyes lifted to meet Diane's. A mother calling me for dinner, a father teaching me how to throw a baseball. Friends, school, plans for college. Those aren't dreams, Diane said, squeezing Olivia's hand gently. They're real memories, from your real life. A distant sound, a closing door, startled them both. Olivia snatched her hand back, her eyes darting toward the buildings in alarm. You have to go, she urged. If they find you here, come with me, Diane pleaded. Right now. We can help you, protect you. There are people waiting to get you out of here. For a moment, it looked as if Olivia was considering it. A visible conflict played out on her face, the yearning for freedom warring against years of conditioning and fear. I can't, she said finally, her voice breaking. It's not just me. There are others more vulnerable. If I disappear, they'll suffer the consequences. We can help all of them, Diane insisted. The authorities will move in if we have enough proof. Olivia shook her head. You don't understand how it works here. The master has connections, people in positions of power. It's happened before, investigations that just vanish. The sound of approaching voices cut them off. Olivia shoved the photographs back at Diane. Go, now! I can't leave you here, Diane protested. You don't have a choice, Olivia replied with surprising firmness. Then, after a brief hesitation, I'll come back to this garden tomorrow, same time. If you really want to help all of us, I'll need proof you can do it, not just promises. The voices were getting closer. With no time for more words, Diane retreated into the forest, her heart tearing at having to leave her daughter again. Before disappearing into the trees, she saw Olivia resume her work in the garden, her posture and expression shifting back into the mask of calm she had perfected over years. Crawford, Mitchell, and Carter met her anxiously when she returned to the observation point. We got all of it, Mitchell confirmed, gesturing to a directional recording setup they had deployed while she spoke with Olivia. Every word, clear evidence of psychological manipulation, cult-like conditions, and potential abuse. Do you think it's enough? Diane asked, her breath still ragged from the tense encounter. It has to be, Crawford replied, especially combined with our surveillance and the positive identification of Olivia Reynolds as a missing person. As they made their way back to camp, Diane filled them in on the details the recording might have missed. Olivia's physical reactions, the moments of connection, the promise of a second meeting. She's experiencing severe cognitive dissonance, Crawford explained. Her constructed world is colliding with real memories that are starting to resurface. She's in an extremely vulnerable psychological state right now. What worries me is what she said about his connections. Harlow, Mitchell commented. If he has allies in positions of authority, it would explain how he's evaded detection for so long. Arriving at the camp, Mitchell immediately established a link with Agent Reeves at the FBI. The conversation was brief but intense. We have concrete evidence, he stated without preamble. Direct testimony from an identified victim naming Robert Harlow as her captor, describing cult conditions, mind control, and possible systematic sexual abuse of multiple victims over years. After listening to the recording transmitted over the satellite phone, Reeves's tone shifted noticeably. This changes things, she admitted, especially combined with the positive ID and the images you sent yesterday. I'll start mobilizing resources immediately. How long? Diane asked, the same question she'd asked the day before, but now with a new urgency. With this, we can accelerate things significantly, Reeves replied. I estimate 48 hours to get the necessary warrants and coordinate a multi-agency operation, possibly less. After the call, the group gathered to determine their next steps. Olivia's promise to meet again the next day presented both an opportunity and a risk. We could just wait for the FBI to move in, Carter suggested, now that they have concrete evidence. 2 days is too long, Diane objected, especially if Olivia is starting to question her situation. Every hour that passes is another chance for Harlow to reinforce his control. Besides, Crawford added, Olivia specifically asked for proof that we can help. If we don't show up tomorrow, she might see that as confirmation of Harlow's warnings that the outside world can't be trusted. So what are you proposing? Mitchell asked. We maintain contact, Diane said firmly. Reinforce the connection. Show her concrete proof that the authorities are involved and that she and the other women will be protected. It's risky, Mitchell warned. If Harlow suspects anything, it's a risk we have to take, Diane insisted. I'm not abandoning her. Not again. As the sun set over the Montana woods, the small team refined their strategy for the following day. They had come a long way from the discovery of a turquoise dress in a hidden footlocker in Connecticut. The truth was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows, revealing a horror greater than any of them had imagined. And at the center of it all was a young woman caught between two realities. Olivia Reynolds and Sarah Langley. A daughter, lost and now found. A victim, transforming into a survivor. For the first time in 12 years, Diane allowed herself to feel something that had been absent for far too long. Genuine hope. Not just of finding her daughter, but of truly getting her back. Dawn brought a leaden sky that promised a storm. Diane watched the dark clouds from the entrance of her tent, a fitting reflection of the tension coiling inside her. In a few hours, she would meet Olivia again, this time with a much more defined plan. The previous night, after the call with the FBI, the group had debated intensely on how to proceed. The final proposal was risky but potentially effective. They would provide Olivia with a pre-programmed satellite phone, documentation of the impending FBI raid, and a detailed map with safe extraction points where she could meet them when the operation began. It's not ideal, Mitchell had admitted, but it gives her agency. It lets her make decisions based on real information, something she's been denied for 12 years. Crawford was now preparing a small but comprehensive package. The phone, additional photographs from her past life, newspaper clippings about her disappearance, and a letter Diane had written through the night appealing not only to Olivia's resurfacing memories, but also to her evident concern for the other women held at the ranch. "Do you think it will work?" Diane asked, as Crawford carefully sealed the package in a waterproof bag. "The connection between you is still alive," the former detective replied. "I saw it in your interaction yesterday. That's our greatest advantage." The plan for the day included not just the meeting with Olivia, but also additional surveillance of the ranch. Carter had established observation points at 3 strategic locations where they would rotate for the next 48 hours, documenting patterns of movement, identifying potential Harlow allies, and looking for vulnerabilities in the perimeter's security. By mid-morning, Diane and Crawford were positioned again at the overlook with a view of the northern gardens. Diane's anxiety grew with every minute that passed, with no sign of Olivia. "What if she doesn't come?" she whispered, scanning the empty garden through her binoculars. "Give it time," Crawford replied, though his own expression revealed a flicker of concern. They might have changed the routines. Half an hour after the agreed-upon time, just as hope began to fade, a figure emerged from one of the secondary buildings. Even at a distance, Diane recognized her daughter instantly. But she wasn't alone. Another, considerably older woman accompanied her. "This complicates things," Crawford muttered, adjusting his binoculars. "The older one is one of the Mother Superiors. Based on our observations, she supervises the younger women." They watched as the 2 women worked in the garden, the older one occasionally giving instructions to Olivia. For nearly an hour, they remained together, leaving no opportunity for a safe approach. Finally, the older woman seemed to receive some kind of signal from the main buildings. After a brief conversation with Olivia, she walked away, leaving her alone in the garden. She had barely disappeared when Olivia, without looking up from her plants, subtly moved toward the edge of the garden closest to the forest. "That's our chance," Diane whispered, already getting to her feet. "Be careful," Crawford warned. "Something feels off. She's too close to the boundary, too exposed. We don't have a choice, Diane replied, beginning to make her way cautiously down the slope. As she neared the edge of the woods, Diane saw that Olivia was still working, but her movements seemed tense, almost rigid. Just as she was about to call out softly, Olivia spoke first without looking at her. "Don't come any closer," she said, her voice barely audible. "We're being watched." Diane froze, her blood turning to ice. "Who?" she whispered back. "Jacob, one of the guardians," Olivia replied, continuing to work as if nothing were wrong. "High position, east building, binoculars. Don't look." With trembling hands, Olivia pulled weeds from the garden bed. "The master knows you were here yesterday. He doesn't know we spoke, just that you were seen in town." "Are you in danger?" Diane asked, keeping to the shadows of the trees. "Not yet," Olivia answered, "but they've increased the surveillance. They're nervous." "Can you get a little closer?" Diane asked, discreetly indicating the package she was carrying. Olivia gave an imperceptible shake of her head. "Impossible without raising suspicion. Leave what you brought under that berry bush to your right. I'll come for it later if I can." "Olivia," Diane began, fear coiling in her gut. "Sarah," her daughter corrected automatically. Then after a pause, "Or at least that's the name I answer to now." For the first time, her eyes met Diane's for a fleeting moment. "You shouldn't have come. It's dangerous for both of us." "I couldn't stay away," Diane replied. "Not after finally finding you." Something in Olivia's expression softened for a second. "The photographs, they stirred things up. Memories I thought were gone, or that they made me forget." "There's more in the package," Diane explained quickly. "And a phone. Instructions. The FBI is moving in soon." Olivia gave a nearly invisible nod. "I have to go. Madeline will be back any second." "Olivia," Diane called out softly, "we will get you out of here. All of you, I promise." A flicker of something, hope, fear, crossed her daughter's face. "Be careful. El Maestro has eyes everywhere, even in the village." With that final warning, Olivia moved away methodically, working her way back toward the center of the garden. Diane, following her instructions, discreetly placed the package under the designated bush and retreated to the safety of the woods. When she rejoined Crawford, her expression must have given away her concern. "What happened?" he asked immediately. "Harlow knows I was in town," Diane replied as they moved quickly up the hill. "They've increased surveillance. Olivia is being watched." Crawford cursed under his breath. "Did you manage to give her the package?" "I left it where she told me to. She said she'd try to get it later." Returning to the camp, they found Mitchell and Carter reviewing recent surveillance footage. Their grim expressions suggested more complications. "We have a problem," Mitchell announced without preamble. "An hour ago, 2 vehicles arrived at the ranch. Armed men, not locals. They look like professional private security." "Is Harlow reinforcing his defenses?" Crawford asked. "Or getting ready to move everyone?" Carter suggested darkly. "I've seen this pattern before. When these groups feel threatened, they sometimes opt for mass relocation." The rain began shortly after noon, first as a gentle drizzle that soon transformed into a relentless downpour. Drops hammered furiously against the tent canvas as the group held an emergency meeting under the makeshift shelter. "Agent Reeves just confirmed," Mitchell reported, putting away the satellite phone. "They've fast-tracked the legal process, but the earliest they can move in is tomorrow at noon." "That's too late," Crawford declared, spreading the latest photographs of the ranch across the damp table. "Look at this." The images showed a surge in activity. Boxes being loaded into vehicles, people moving with urgency between buildings, and most worryingly, the children being gathered in the main building. "They're preparing to evacuate," Carter confirmed. "I've seen enough of these operations to recognize the signs." Diane felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. So close to getting Olivia back. So close to the truth. And now it all threatened to vanish again. "Can we contact Olivia?" she asked, desperation seeping into her voice. "Check if she got the package, the phone we left?" "It hasn't been activated yet," Mitchell replied, checking a tracking device. "We'll know the instant she turns it on." The rain intensified, turning the forest floor into a quagmire and severely limiting visibility. Despite the conditions, Carter and Crawford took turns keeping watch on the ranch, protecting the equipment as best they could under layers of waterproof gear. Near dusk, though it was hard to tell with the sky completely overcast, Crawford hurried back to camp, soaked but with eyes bright with excitement. "We have contact," he announced, holding up the tracking device, which now emitted a pulsing signal. "The phone is active." Mitchell immediately established a connection. After a few tense seconds of waiting, a text message appeared on the screen. "Package received. Evacuation confirmed for tonight. Destination unknown. 23 women, 7 children, 8 men including H vehicles ready on the east side. Window of opportunity between 2200 and 2300 during guard change. I need guarantees of protection for all." "Oh, it's her?" Diane whispered, her heart accelerating. "And she's giving us critical intel," Crawford added. "She's risking everything. If they find her with that phone..." Mitchell was already typing a response. "Information received. FBI notified. We guarantee protection for all victims. Extraction point, north perimeter by the creek. Can you get there?" The reply took several agonizing minutes. "Difficult, but possible. I'm assigned to the children's group with 2 other women. I could create a distraction." "When will the FBI arrive?" Mitchell looked at the others with a grave expression before typing. "Tomorrow noon, too late if you evacuate tonight." This time the response was immediate. "Then we have to act. They trust me with the children. I can get them to the extraction point at 22:30. Are you prepared to receive them? Others might follow if they see a chance." A tense silence fell over the group. What Olivia was proposing was extremely risky, potentially deadly, and legally questionable. But it might also be their only chance to rescue the victims before they disappeared again. "We need to contact Reeves," Mitchell said finally. "Inform her of the development and see if they can move up the timeline." While Mitchell communicated with the FBI, Diane couldn't tear her eyes from Olivia's message. She could feel her daughter's determination through those simple words. After 12 years of conditioning and control, she had made the choice to act, to risk it all for her freedom and the freedom of others. The conversation with the FBI was brief but intense. When it was over, Mitchell shook his head in frustration. "They can't move any sooner. The storm has complicated air access, and the nearest ground teams are 3 hours away in normal conditions, longer in this weather." "So what if we act?" Diane asked, verbalizing what everyone was thinking. "We receive the children and whoever else Olivia can bring. We keep them safe until the FBI arrives. It's extremely risky," Carter warned. "If Harlow and his men find out what's happening, it's riskier not to do anything," Crawford interjected. "If those people are moved tonight, it could be years before we find them again. If we ever do." The discussion was intense but short. The reality was simple. They didn't have many options. Finally, Mitchell sent a message confirming the plan. "We will be at the extraction point at 22:30. Bring everyone you can without putting yourself in excessive danger. FBI has been notified and is en route." Olivia's reply was a simple, "Understood." The next few hours passed in a frenzy of preparation. Carter, with his field operations experience, directed the logistics, organizing escape routes, secondary rally points in case of separation, and assigning responsibilities. "Diane and I will receive the children and women at the extraction point," he explained. Crawford and Mitchell will hold surveillance positions here and here to warn of any pursuit. At 22:15, under a rain that was finally beginning to subside, the group moved into position. Diane and Carter settled at the agreed-upon spot by the creek, now a raging current from the downpour. The darkness was almost absolute, with only the faint moonlight occasionally visible between the clouds. "Do you think she'll come?" Diane whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the water. "She's risked everything to get this far," Carter replied. If there's any chance at all, she'll try." The minutes passed with agonizing slowness. At 22:35, 5 minutes past the agreed time, there was no sign of Olivia or the children. Diane could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, every second a torment. At 22:40, Carter's comm crackled softly. It was Mitchell's tense voice. "Movement on the east perimeter, lights, vehicles are getting ready." "Have they started the evacuation?" Carter asked, concern heavy in his voice. "Negative. It looks more like... Wait. Alert at the ranch. They're running, searching for something. Or someone." Diane and Carter exchanged alarmed glances. They had discovered Olivia's plan. Before they could speculate further, a subtle sound in the nearby vegetation put them on high alert. Carter drew his weapon, aiming it into the darkness. "Who's there?" he whispered firmly. "It's me." From between the bushes emerged a familiar voice. It was Olivia, soaked and exhausted, but with a look of sheer determination. Diane's daughter. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, in a silent, orderly line, were 7 children of various ages, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. And behind them, to Diane's surprise, were 4 other young women, all dressed in the same simple ranch attire. "You made it," Diane whispered, emotion choking her voice. Olivia gave a short nod, her focus on the children. "Quickly, they'll discover us soon if they haven't already." With surprising efficiency, Carter organized the group for the move toward the vehicles. The children, clearly accustomed to obeying without question, followed instructions with almost military precision. "How did you get out with all of them?" Diane asked, as she helped a small girl cross a particularly difficult patch of ground. "The others helped me," Olivia replied, gesturing to the women with them. "They've been waiting for a chance for years. When I showed them the proof you brought..." One of the women, who looked no older than 25, though her eyes suggested she had lived much longer, drew near. "We all wanted to leave," she said quietly. "But fear? It's like an invisible prison." "What about the others?" Carter asked as they moved as quickly as possible through the difficult terrain. "Some are too conditioned," Olivia explained. "Others are afraid of the consequences, and some..." Her voice broke slightly. "Some truly believe the outside world is the hell he describes." Carter's comm crackled again. "Full alarm at the ranch. Lights everywhere. Vehicles are mobilizing. They've discovered the escape." "We have to hurry," Carter urged, quickening the pace. The march through the dark, sodden forest was extremely difficult, especially with small children. The youngest, a girl of barely 4, stumbled constantly until Diane scooped her up into her arms. "What's your name, sweetie?" she asked as they moved. "Lily," the little girl replied in a barely audible whisper. "Are we going to a bad place?" "No, Lily," Diane answered firmly. "We're going to a safe place where no one will ever hurt you again." Olivia, walking beside them and guiding the other children, glanced at Diane with an unreadable expression. "She's been told her whole life that the outside world is evil," she explained quietly, "that only El Maestro can protect them." "How could he do this?" Diane asked, rage mixing with her physical exhaustion. "How could he manipulate innocent children like this?" "Total control," Olivia answered simply. "That's what he always wanted. Over us, over the children, over everything." They pushed onward, each step a battle against the treacherous ground and the growing fear of being discovered. In the distance, they could occasionally hear engines and voices, signs of the search that was undoubtedly underway. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they spotted the vehicles they had strategically positioned for the extraction. Mitchell was already there, immediately helping to organize the boarding. "Crawford is still on watch," he reported as he helped lift the children inside. "The search is expanding. We have to move fast." With an efficiency born of urgency, they distributed the escapees between the two all-terrain vehicles. Diane, Olivia, and three of the youngest children in one, Carter, Mitchell, and the rest in the other. "Where are we going?" one of the women asked, fear evident in her voice. "To a safe house in Bozeman," Mitchell replied. "The FBI will meet us there. They'll be waiting." Just as they were about to leave, the comm crackled again with Crawford's strained voice. "Vehicles approaching on the main road, less than 2 kilometers out. Move, now!" The engines roared to life, and the vehicles lurched forward over the rough terrain, taking an alternate route Carter had identified earlier. In the back seat, Diane held Lily protectively while she watched Olivia, who kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her profile occasionally illuminated by the moonlight now filtering through the scattered klute. "You did it," Diane said softly. "You're free." Olivia turned slowly toward her, and for the first time Diane saw something that had been absent in their last encounter. A genuine spark of hope in her eyes. "I won't be truly free until they all are," she replied, "and until he answers for what he's done." As the vehicles sped away from the ranch, deeper into the night toward a future that was uncertain but filled with possibility, Diane knew their journey was just beginning. Olivia's physical recovery was only the first step. The process of mental healing, of rebuilding an identity shattered by years of manipulation, would be long and difficult. But for the first time in 12 years, there was a path forward, a path mother and daughter would walk together. And as the storm finally dissipated, revealing a star-filled sky over the Montana mountains, Diane held her daughter's hand, a silent promise that whatever happened, they would never be separated again. In the distance, the lights of the pursuing vehicles were barely visible, fading as they took routes that led further and further from the ranch. The real storm, the one that had begun that spring night in 2002 when Olivia disappeared, was finally beginning to break. The journey that had started with the discovery of a turquoise dress in a hidden hope chest was far from over. But the central mystery, what had happened to Olivia Reynolds, was no longer a question without an answer. Now the questions looked to the future, not the past.